The obsidian chamber had stood for 40,000 years at the heart of the galaxy, and in all that time, no species had ever dared to challenge the 12 elder races who gathered within its dark walls. Yet today, they had found something that troubled them deeply: humanity. High Arbiter Selen of the Valorian Dominion sat upon her throne of black crystal, her four eyes scanning the assembled ambassadors with growing unease. The reports had become impossible to ignore any longer. 200 years, Ambassador Vorath of the Kethra hissed, his scales rippling with agitation as he addressed the chamber. In just 200 years, these creatures have spread like a plague across 17 star systems. The holographic display at the center of the chamber flickered to life, showing a map of the galaxy. Red dots marked human colonies, spreading outward from a small blue world called Earth like drops of blood in water. Their population growth defies all natural law, Vorath continued, his clawed hand sweeping across the display. They breed faster than the Morvac locusts. They consume resources at rates we have never witnessed. They trade with species outside our jurisdiction and ignore our warnings. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the 12 delegations. The Ithari clicked their mandibles in disapproval. The Sorvine delegates shifted their massive bodies with obvious discomfort. Even the normally peaceful Alindri whispered amongst themselves with worried expressions. High Arbiter Selen raised one slender hand, and silence fell immediately across the chamber. She had ruled this council for 3,000 years, and her word was law. We have given the humans every opportunity to comply with galactic standards, she said, her voice echoing through the vast space. We have sent diplomatic missions. We have offered treaties. We have issued warnings. They respond to each with the same infuriating politeness and then continue exactly as before. They are young and foolish, growled Admiral Karth of the Dominion fleet, a massive warrior whose armor bore the marks of 100 campaigns. They do not understand that we could wipe them from existence with a single command. Them, perhaps, Selen said slowly, her eyes narrowing. It is time we taught them this lesson. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some called for caution, but most demanded action. The humans had grown too bold, too fast, too unpredictable. They threatened the order that had maintained galactic peace for millennia. When the vote came, it was unanimous. 12 species, 12 votes, all in favor of war. Selen felt a surge of satisfaction as she personally drafted the declaration. It was elegant and formal, listing humanity's crimes against galactic order and announcing the consequences. She transmitted it herself to Earth's United Nations Space Command, expecting to witness fear, panic, perhaps desperate pleas for mercy. The screen flickered and a human face appeared. It was a woman, middle-aged, with tired eyes and hair that looked like it had not been brushed that day. She wore a wrinkled uniform with a coffee stain on the collar. United Nations Space Command, Communications Division, the woman said in a flat voice. How may I direct your call? Selen blinked all four of her eyes in confusion. I am High Arbiter Selen of the Galactic Council. I am transmitting a formal declaration of war against your species. The woman glanced at something off-screen, presumably the document, and let out a small sigh. Right then. I will forward this to the relevant department. You should receive a response within 5 to 7 business days. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Did you not hear me? Selen demanded, her composure cracking. This is a declaration of war. Your entire species faces annihilation. Yes, I understood that, the woman replied, sounding almost bored. But the Admiral is in a meeting right now, and protocol requires proper documentation before we can officially acknowledge hostile action. Would you like to schedule a callback? Before Selen could respond, the transmission ended. She sat in stunned silence, staring at the blank screen. Around her, the council members exchanged confused glances. What just happened? Vorath asked, his scales now pale with bewilderment. Selen had no answer. Across the vast gulf of space, on a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, Admiral Wei Chun received the forwarded declaration as she sat down to breakfast. She read it carefully between bites of toast, her expression never changing. "Another one," she muttered to herself, reaching for her coffee. Her aide, a young lieutenant named Marcus, stood nervously nearby. "Admiral, should we sound the general alert?" he asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Should we mobilize the fleet?" Chun took a long sip of her coffee and considered the question. "What day is it today?" "Monday, Admiral." "Then no," she replied calmly. "Schedule a staff meeting for Thursday. We will discuss our response then. Also, remind me to call my daughter. Her birthday is next week, and I need to order a gift." Marcus stared at her with wide eyes. "Admiral, with respect, they just declared war on all of humanity." Chun finally looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes that made the young officer take a step back. Not fear, not anger, but a deep and ancient weariness. "Lieutenant, I have been in the military for 40 years. I have seen 3 regional conflicts, 2 colony rebellions, and the Proxima incident. My grandmother survived the last war on Earth. My great-great-grandfather fought in something called World War II. Do you know what I have learned from all of that history?" Marcus shook his head silently. "Panic helps no one," Chun said, turning back to her breakfast. "The universe is full of things that want to kill us. It always has been. We handle them one at a time with proper planning and adequate resources. Now please, let me finish my toast." She marked the declaration with a stamp that read, "Priority Moderate," and placed it in her inbox. Then she pulled out her tablet and began browsing gift options for her daughter. Across the galaxy, the Council's mighty armada began to gather, 3,000 warships representing the combined military power of 12 ancient civilizations. They expected a quick and decisive victory. They had no idea what they were about to face. They could not possibly understand that for humanity, this was not a crisis. It was simply a Tuesday. The Council Armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of human territory 3 weeks after the declaration, and Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of his flagship with anticipation burning in his chest. 3,000 warships stretched behind him, a wall of metal and fire that had crushed dozens of species throughout galactic history. "Scan the system," he commanded, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Show me their defenses." His tactical officer worked the controls with trembling claws. The screen filled with data, and Korath leaned forward eagerly, then stopped, confused. "Admiral," the officer said slowly, "I am detecting one vessel approaching our position." "One vessel?" Korath demanded. "What class? Battleship? Carrier?" "Neither, sir." "It appears to be," the officer paused, double-checking his readings, "a standard civilian shuttle." "Unarmed!" The bridge fell silent. Every officer exchanged bewildered glances. This had to be some kind of trick. "On screen," Korath ordered. The view screen showed a small, boxy craft painted in cheerful blue and white colors. The words UNSC Administrative Services were written on the side in multiple languages. It was approaching the Armada at a leisurely pace, as if it had all the time in the universe. "They are hailing us, Admiral." "Put them through." A human face appeared on screen, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, small glasses, and a friendly but somewhat tired expression. He wore a simple gray suit and held a large stack of papers. "Good morning," the man said pleasantly. "My name is Gerald Patterson, and I am a representative of the United Nations Space Command Administrative Division. Welcome to human space." Korath felt his jaw drop slightly before he recovered. "Human, you are addressing the commander of the Galactic Council Armada. We have come to bring your species to justice for your crimes against galactic order. Yes, I have the documentation right here, Gerald replied, shuffling through his papers. Declaration of war, received and acknowledged. However, before we can proceed, there are some forms that need to be completed. Forms? Korath repeated, certain he had misheard. Standard procedure, I am afraid, Gerald said apologetically. First, we will need environmental impact assessments for any weapons discharged in this system. There is a protected nebula nearby, and we cannot have weapons fire affecting the local stellar ecosystem. He held up a thick document and continued without pause. Additionally, all military personnel entering human territory must complete visa applications. I have 3,000 copies here, one for each vessel. I have 3,000 copies here, one for 8,000 copies here, one for each vessel. Please ensure all crew members fill them out in triplicate. Korath stared at the human, unable to form words. Also, Gerald added, glancing at his notes, your flagship is currently positioned in a designated no-hovering zone. I will have to issue a citation unless you move at least 300 kilometers to the left. Parking regulations apply to all vessels regardless of origin or intent. This is an invasion. Korath finally roared. We do not need your permission to destroy you. Gerald nodded sympathetically. I completely understand your frustration, Admiral, but regulations are regulations. I would hate for your conquest to be delayed by legal complications. The paperwork alone could take months to sort out. He smiled helpfully. Now, shall I come aboard to distribute the forms, or would you prefer a digital transfer? Korath cut the transmission and turned to his officers. Ignore that fool. Begin the attack immediately. But even as the armada surged forward, something strange was happening across human space. It was not panic, not chaos, not the desperate scrambling of a species facing extinction. It was something far more unsettling. On Earth, factories that have been producing consumer electronics simply changed their production lines. Machines that made entertainment devices began making missiles instead. Workers who had been assembling communication units started assembling weapons with the same calm efficiency. There were no dramatic speeches, no declarations of defiance, just a quiet shift in priorities. In cities across 100 worlds, humans went about their daily lives with only minor adjustments. Community centers held invasion preparedness seminars, and people attended them with the same enthusiasm they showed for fire safety drills, bored but compliant. The extranet exploded with content about the council, but it was not fearful. It was mocking. Memes spread faster than the armada could travel, depicting council leaders in embarrassing situations. Someone created a song called 12 Species, 0 Wins that went viral within hours. A fast food chain released a limited edition Council Crusher burger with 12 different toppings. On the colony world of New Helsinki, a grandmother named Anja Korhanen read the news about the approaching enemy fleet while knitting a sweater for her grandson. She was 73 years old, had survived 2 colony plagues and a mining accident, and had absolutely no intention of letting some aliens ruin her retirement. She called her neighbors, mostly other retirees and young families, and organized a meeting at the local community hall. By the end of the evening, they had formed what Anja cheerfully called the Neighborhood Watch, but what was actually a fully operational guerrilla resistance cell. My grandfather fought in something called the Winter War. She told her fellow colonists, her knitting needles clicking steadily. A much bigger enemy invaded his country, and everyone expected them to lose. They did not. We have his old rifle in the attic, and I think it still works. Her neighbors nodded seriously and began making plans. One had experience with explosives from his mining days. Another knew how to hack communication systems. A teenage girl volunteered to coordinate with other resistance cells using a gaming network the aliens would never think to monitor. Council intelligence officers began sending back reports, and their commanders read them with growing confusion. The humans are not mobilizing in the traditional sense, one report stated. There are no mass evacuations, no visible military buildup, no signs of fear or desperation. They appear to be treating this war as a minor inconvenience rather than existential threat. Another report was even more troubling. Intercepted human communications show widespread awareness of the invasion, but the dominant emotional response is not fear, it is annoyance. They are irritated that we are disrupting their schedules. High Arbiter Selen read these reports in her private chambers, and for the first time in 3,000 years, she felt a flicker of doubt. She had seen species crumble at the mere threat of council action. She had watched civilizations tear themselves apart in panic before a single shot was fired. But these humans, they were different. They were not scared. They were not desperate. They were filing paperwork and making jokes and organizing their grandmothers into resistance cells. They responded to annihilation the way most species responded to bad weather, with a shrug and a plan. What manner of creatures are these? She whispered to herself, staring at the reports. The answer would come soon enough, and it would be more terrifying than anything the Council had ever imagined. High Arbiter Selen stood before the Council's greatest historians in a chamber filled with ancient data crystals, demanding answers that none of them wanted to give. The war had been going for 2 months, and nothing was happening the way it should. "Explain this to me," she commanded, her voice sharp with frustration. "How can a species so young, so primitive, so fragile face the combined might of 12 civilizations without fear?" The lead historian, an ancient Ithari named Chronicler Veth, clicked his mandibles nervously before stepping forward. He had spent the past weeks diving deep into humanity's records, and what he had found had left him unable to sleep. "High Arbiter," he began, his voice trembling, "we have studied their history extensively. I must warn you what I am about to share is deeply disturbing." Selen gestured impatiently for him to continue. "The humans did not evolve on a garden world like most council species," Veth explained. "Their planet Earth is what xenobiologists classify as a Category 12 death world." Murmurs of shock rippled through the assembled council members. Category 12 was the highest danger rating, reserved for worlds so hostile that colonization was considered impossible. Their planet has extreme temperature variations, violent weather systems, unstable tectonic activity, and an atmosphere that was toxic for most of their evolutionary history, Veth continued. But that is not the worst of it. He activated a holographic display showing Earth's surface. Every living thing on their world evolved to kill. Predators hunted them from the moment they developed consciousness. Diseases swept through their populations regularly. Natural disasters destroyed their settlements without warning. They lived in constant, unrelenting danger for 200,000 years. Surely they developed technology to protect themselves, Ambassador Vorath interrupted. "Yes," Veth agreed. "And then they used that technology to try to destroy themselves." The display changed to show images that made several council members look away in horror cities reduced to ash. Landscapes scarred by unimaginable weapons, bodies stacked in numbers too vast to comprehend. "They have fought each other continuously throughout their entire history," Veth said. "They invented weapons capable of ending all life on their planet, and then pointed those weapons at each other for decades. They call this period the Cold War, and they somehow survived it through what they describe as mutual fear and dumb luck." He showed more images. Trenches filled with soldiers, bombs falling from the sky, mushroom clouds rising over ruined cities. "This is World War II, he explained. A conflict that killed approximately 70 million of their own kind in just 6 years. Before that, they had World War I, which killed another 20 million. And these are just the largest conflicts. They have had thousands of smaller wars throughout their existence. High Arbiter Selen felt something cold settle in her stomach. You are telling me they nearly destroyed themselves repeatedly? Yes, High Arbiter. But it gets worse. Veth changed the display again, showing graphs of population decline, maps of spreading disease, images of starving masses. They have survived multiple plagues that killed significant portions of their population. They have endured famines, droughts, ice ages, and at least one asteroid impact that wiped out most life on their planet. They even managed to damage their own atmosphere so badly that their entire climate began to change. And they survived all of this? Vareth asked, his voice barely a whisper. Not only survived, Veth replied, but thrived. Each catastrophe made them stronger, more adaptable, more resilient. They developed a cultural relationship with extinction that we have never seen in any other species. He pulled up examples of human art and entertainment. They have entire genres of storytelling dedicated to the destruction of their world. They call them disaster movies and post-apocalyptic fiction. They find these stories entertaining. The council members stared at the screen in disbelief as clips played cities crumbling, asteroids striking, zombies rising, aliens invading. And in theater after theater, humans watched and ate snacks and laughed. They are insane, someone muttered. No, Veth corrected gently. They are conditioned. When you have faced extinction as many times as they have, it becomes normal. Death is not a stranger to them. It is an old companion they have learned to walk beside. The first real battle of the war came 3 days later, when Admiral Karth ordered a precision strike on a human agricultural world called Harvest. His troops expected easy conquest. It was just a farming colony, after all, populated by civilians. The initial bombardment went perfectly. Human defenses were minimal, and the planetary militia retreated almost immediately. Korath's forces landed and began their occupation with confidence. That confidence lasted exactly 1 week. The farmers who had fled into the hills did not stay there. They came back at night, armed with weapons they had built themselves from farm equipment and mining supplies. They attacked supply lines, destroyed vehicles, and vanished before the council forces could respond. A Kethra patrol was ambushed by a group of humans using improvised explosives made from fertilizer. A command post was infiltrated by a teenage girl who had crawled through 2 kilometers of sewage, tunnels to plant a virus in their communication systems. The local wildlife, creatures the colonists had been raising for food, were released into council camps, causing chaos. And through it all, the humans kept working their fields. Korath received reports of farmers planting crops in the morning, fighting guerrilla actions in the afternoon, and returning home for dinner with their families. They treated war like another chore to be completed, another problem to be solved. A Kethra soldier who survived an ambush was found wandering in shock 3 days later. When asked what happened, he could only repeat the same words over and over. They were smiling. They were bleeding and dying, and they were smiling. What is wrong with them? After 1 month of occupation, Korath withdrew his forces. He had lost more soldiers on that single farming world than in his previous 3 campaigns combined. His troops refused to return, speaking of humans who felt no pain, who laughed at death, who kept fighting long after they should have fallen. When Selen demanded an explanation, Korath could only shake his head. They are not like us, he said, his voice hollow. They do not fear death because they have lived with it their entire existence. They do not panic because panic is a luxury they cannot afford. They fight like creatures who have nothing to lose because, in their minds, they have already lost everything many times before. He looked at Selen with something she had never seen in his eyes before, fear. We thought we were bringing them war, he whispered. We did not understand for them. War never ended. It was always there, waiting. We simply reminded them that it was time to fight again, and they responded like it was routine because for them it is. The chamber fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. They had awakened something ancient and terrible, something forged in fire and blood and endless struggle. And now that something was looking back at them. 6 months into the war, the Galactic Council held an emergency session in the Obsidian Chamber, and the mood was nothing like it had been when they first declared war. 4 species had already withdrawn their forces, their ambassadors refusing to make eye contact with their former allies. The remaining 8 looked exhausted and afraid. High Arbiter Selen listened to the casualty reports with growing horror. They had lost over 200 warships, not to human military vessels, but to converted cargo freighters, mining ships, and machines so old they should have been in museums. How is this possible? Demanded Ambassador Vorath, his scales now permanently pale. We have the finest warships in the galaxy. Our weapons are superior in every way. Admiral Karath answered from his place at the war table, his voice heavy with defeat. Their weapons are inferior, yes. Their ships are slower, weaker, held together by prayers and improvised repairs. But they fight without fear, without hesitation, without the slightest concern for their own survival. He pulled up combat footage that made several delegates look away. Watch this. A human destroyer, outnumbered 5-1, damaged beyond any hope of victory. Standard doctrine would be to surrender or retreat. Instead, they accelerated directly into our formation and detonated their reactor. The footage showed the explosion and the 3 council ships it took with it. They call it a ramming action, Karath continued. Their pilots volunteer for these missions. They consider it an honor to die taking enemies with them. Madness, whispered the Alindri ambassador. No, Karath replied. Doctrine. They've been doing this for centuries. Their history is full of warriors who gave their lives to take enemies with them. It is woven into their culture. But the worst news was yet to come. They are no longer just defending, Karath admitted, his voice dropping. They have begun counterattacking. The strategic display showed human fleet movements, and gasps echoed through the chamber. Red arrows pushed deep into Council territory, striking at supply lines, communications relays, and military outposts. Where did they get the ships? Selen demanded. They built them, Karath answered. In 6 months, they have increased their military production by 400%. Factories work around the clock with 3 shifts of workers. Civilians volunteer for manufacturing duty, like they are signing up for sports leagues. They have converted passenger liners into troop transports, pleasure yachts into patrol boats, even orbital stations into mobile fortresses. He shook his head in disbelief. We thought their industrial capacity was limited. We were wrong. They were simply not motivated before. Now they are. A new transmission alert interrupted the session. An aide rushed in with a terrified expression. High Arbiter, the humans are hailing us directly. Their Admiral Chun wishes to address the Council. Selen hesitated, then nodded. Put her through. The screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a human warship. Admiral Wei Chun sat in the command chair, surrounded by officers who worked their stations with calm efficiency. Behind them, through the viewports, the wreckage of Council vessels drifted past. Members of the Galactic Council, Chun began, her voice steady and clear. 6 months ago, you declared war on humanity. You expected us to surrender, to beg for mercy, to crumble before your superior numbers and technology. Instead, we adapted. She leaned forward, and her eyes seemed to pierce through the screen. Do you know what we call this war in our media? We call it the Tuesday War, because it started on Tuesday, and because that is how important it feels to us. Not a great crisis, not an existential threat, just another problem to be managed. Vorath started to speak, but Chun continued without pause. Your species evolved on paradise worlds, stable climates, abundant resources, no predators worth mentioning. You developed civilization in comfort and peace. Your greatest challenges were political disagreements and trade disputes. You have never truly faced extinction." Her voice hardened. "We crawled out of an Earth that tried to kill us every single day for 200,000 years. Our ancestors were hunted by predators with bigger teeth and sharper claws. They survived ice ages by huddling in caves and burning anything that would catch fire. They watched their children die from diseases they could not understand. And they kept going." She stood, and the camera followed her as she walked across the bridge. "We invented weapons that could destroy our entire planet, and then spent 50 years pointing them at each other. We poisoned our own air and water, and then figured out how to fix it. We survived plagues that killed millions and came out stronger on the other side. We are built for crisis, shaped by disaster, forged in fires that would have consumed any other species." She stopped and turned back to face the screen directly. "You thought numbers would defeat us. We have fought wars where we were outnumbered 100 to 1 and won. You thought technology would crush us. We have faced enemies with better weapons and found ways to overcome them. You thought fear would break us. We have stared into the void of our own extinction so many times that it no longer frightens us." Admiral Chun's expression softened slightly, but her words remained steel. "I am not telling you this to boast. I am telling you this so you understand what you are facing. Every generation of humanity has confronted something that should have destroyed us, and we are still here. We have had practice." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data chip, holding it up to the camera. "This contains the coordinates of your hidden shipyards, the ones you thought no one knew about. Our intelligence operatives obtained them 3 weeks ago. They infiltrated your territory disguised as refugees, walked right through your security, and copied your most classified files." The council members erupted in shock and outrage, but Chun talked over them. "By the time you receive this message, those shipyards will already be burning. We are not waiting for you to come to us anymore. We are coming to you." She sat back down in her command chair and smiled, not a cool smile, not a triumphant smile, but the calm smile of someone who had seen worse and survived. "You can still end this. Sue for peace, withdraw your forces, and we will stop. Continue fighting, and we will show you why every species that has ever tried to destroy humanity has failed. The choice is yours." The transmission ended, and the chamber fell into chaos. 3 hours later, reports came in confirming Chun's words. 5 hidden shipyards, representing decades of construction and trillions of credits in investment, had been destroyed in coordinated strikes. The Council's ability to replace its losses had been crippled in a single day. 2 more species withdrew from the war that night. High Arbiter Selen sat alone in her chambers, staring at the map of the galaxy as more red dots appeared, human fleets pushing deeper into Council space, seemingly unstoppable. For the first time in 3,000 years, she began to consider the possibility that she had made a terrible mistake. But it was too late to undo what had been done. The only path forward now was to hope that the humans would accept surrender when it came, because it was no longer a question of if, but when. 1 year after the Galactic Council had declared war on humanity, High Arbiter Selen traveled to Earth under a flag of truce, and every moment of the journey felt like walking toward her own execution. She had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, had crushed rebellions and conquered empires, had never once known defeat until now. Her shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, and she pressed her face against the viewport, expecting to see a world scarred by war, cities in ruins, a population broken by conflict. What she saw instead made her 4 eyes widen in disbelief. The planet below was beautiful. Blue oceans sparkled under the yellow sun. Green continents stretched across the surface. Cities glittered like jewels, their towers reaching toward the sky. And everywhere she looked, there was movement, ships coming and going, aircraft crossing the skies, signs of a civilization that was not just surviving but thriving. "How is this possible?" she whispered to her aide. "We bombed their colonies. We attacked their shipping lanes. Where is the destruction?" The aide had no answer. They landed in a city called Geneva, nestled between mountains and a great lake. And Selen stepped out expecting armed guards, hostile crowds, perhaps even assassination attempts. Instead, she found a normal day in a normal city. People walked past her shuttle without a second glance, humans of all ages going about their business, carrying shopping bags, walking pets, chatting on communication devices. Children played in a nearby park while their parents watched. A vendor sold something called ice cream from a small cart. No one seemed to care that the leader of their enemy had just landed in their midst. A young human officer approached with a polite smile. "Hi, Arbiter Selen. Admiral Chun is waiting for you. Please follow me." They walked through the city streets, and Selen observed everything with growing confusion. She saw no military presence, no signs of rationing, no evidence that these people had been at war for an entire year. It was as if the conflict had happened on another planet entirely. "Where are your soldiers?" she finally asked. "On the front lines mostly," the officer replied casually. "Some are on leave, visiting their families. There is a veteran support center a few blocks from here if you would like to visit. But your civilian population, surely they have been affected by the war?" The officer shrugged. "Some adjustments, certainly. There are certain goods that are harder to get, and taxes went up a bit. But life goes on, High Arbiter. We cannot stop living just because someone declared war on us." They arrived at a small cafe overlooking the lake, and there sat Admiral Wei Chun at a table by the window. She was alone, dressed in a simple civilian outfit, reading a book and sipping something from a ceramic cup. She looked up as Selen approached and smiled. "Hi, Arbiter. Thank you for coming. Please, sit down. Would you like some coffee?" Selen lowered herself into the chair across from Chun, feeling utterly out of place. "I came to discuss terms of surrender." "I assumed as much," Chun replied, setting down her book. "The coffee here is quite good, by the way. This cafe has been operating for over 200 years. How can you be so calm?" Selen demanded, her composure finally cracking. "We declared war on your entire species. We tried to destroy you." "Yes, you did. And you sit here drinking coffee and reading novels as if nothing happened." Chen was quiet for a moment, looking out at the lake where a small boat sailed in the afternoon breeze. "Do you know what I was reading? It is a story about the end of the world, a great disaster that wipes out most of humanity. The survivors have to rebuild civilization from scratch." She turned back to Selen. "We have thousands of stories like this. We write them, we read them, we watch them on screens for entertainment. We imagine our own destruction over and over because we know it could happen at any moment." "That is morbid," Selen said. "Perhaps, but it is also preparation. When you have faced the end so many times, in fiction, in history, in the fears that keep you awake at night, you learn to live with it. You cannot spend every day in terror. You would go mad. So you compartmentalize." She gestured out the window at the peaceful city. The war was real, and it mattered. People died, and we mourned them. But we also kept living. We went to work, raised our children, celebrated birthdays and holidays. We gave the war its proper place important, but not all-consuming. Selen shook her head slowly. "I have ruled the council for 3,000 years. I have never encountered a species like yours." "You probably never will again," Chun agreed. "We are products of our environment, a death world, that tried to kill us from the moment we evolved consciousness. We learned to keep going because the alternative was extinction. And now that determination is woven into everything we are. She leaned forward. You want to know how we did this? How we fought off the combined might of 12 civilizations? The answer is simple. We treated it like we treat everything else. We identified the problem. We allocated resources. We assigned personnel. We made plans and executed them. War is terrible, but it is also just another challenge to be overcome. You make it sound so simple, Selen said bitterly. It is not simple at all. It is incredibly hard. But we have been doing hard things for 200,000 years. We have practice. The peace treaty was negotiated over the next 3 days, and it was surprisingly fair. The humans did not demand reparations or humiliation. They asked for recognition of their territorial rights, establishment of diplomatic relations, and guarantees of non-aggression. They wanted trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Why are you not demanding more? Selen asked as she reviewed the final document. You won. You could ask for anything. What would be the point? Chun replied. Crushing you would just create resentment and future conflict. We have learned from our own history that vindictive peace leads to more war. We would rather have trading partners than conquered subjects. Selen signed the treaty with a shaking hand, and just like that, the war was over. She watched as a human aide took the document, stamped it with an official seal, and filed it in a folder labeled Resolved Conflicts. The folder went into a cabinet between something called Martian Water Rights Dispute and Proxima Trade Negotiation. 1 year of war, millions of lives lost. The balance of galactic power forever altered, and for the humans, it was just another file in a very long history of crises survived. As Selen boarded her shuttle to leave Earth, she looked back at the city one last time. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Humans walked along the waterfront, enjoying the evening air, completely unconcerned with the momentous events that had just concluded. She thought about what Chun had said about a species forged by constant struggle, shaped by endless disaster, conditioned to treat even extinction as just another problem to be solved. She thought about the Council's 40,000 years of peace and prosperity, and how soft they had become in comparison. And she thought about the future, a galaxy that would never be the same, now that humanity had taken its place among the stars. The shuttle lifted off, carrying her back to the stars, back to a council that would need to be rebuilt almost from scratch. But Selen found that she was not entirely unhappy with how things had turned out. The humans had taught her something valuable, that survival was not about avoiding hardship, but about adapting to it. That strength came not from comfort, but from struggle. That the species who feared death least were often the ones who lived longest. She had declared war expecting an easy victory. Instead, she had received the most important lesson of her 3,000-year life. And somewhere on Earth, Admiral Wei Chun finished her coffee, returned her book to the library, and went home to have dinner with her family. Just another Tuesday. Just another crisis resolved. Just another day in the long and remarkable story of humanity.